The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Part of the training is learning to die well, which is another way of maybe saying learning to allow God to enter in and inhabit our grief with us and continue to find out that He's capable, that He can do things that we can't do.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Matthew Clark is a singer-songwriter, a podcaster, and an essayist. He's exceedingly thoughtful and well-read, and all that thinking and well-reading makes its way into everything he makes and every conversation, as you're about to find out when you listen to this episode. Matt's most recent project is an album called Only the Lover Sings, and a companion book by the same title, a compilation of essays by various writers inspired by the songs on the album. Matthew Clark, I'm mighty happy to have you on the Habit Podcast.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So by the time this podcast episode publishes, you will have recently released an album, which is the first of a trilogy, the Well trilogy, but this album is called Only the Lover Sings.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's also a book releasing with it.
Yeah, it's a book/album. It's both at the same time.
Do you have to get a special permit to do that, or can you just?
Yeah, I did. Mississippi does allow you to get permits for things like this.
That's good.
Thank goodness I live in Mississippi.
Yeah. Oh, I know. One of the more regulated states, you really would be in trouble.
No, yeah.
The book is a collection of essays, not just by you.
Yeah, nobody would want to read that.
Right.
So I figured I'd get some help.
I would read it, by the way, but
Okay.
That doesn't mean there'd be a large audience, just me. Yeah. So you recruited writer friends to help.
Yeah.
I love something you said in the introduction, that a body with one part isn't a body.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to have just one part.
It made me think about what's the C.S. Lewis book, part of one of the space it's the space trilogy book that's not set in space, where there's just a head.
That hit. Oh yeah.
That hideous strength.
That is so creepy. I've actually been listening to that recently.
Yeah.
And, I think if that were ever made into a movie, it would actually be a terrifying movie.
Yeah, it really would be.
Yeah.
But we're getting off track here. We were talking. Yeah. We went from collaboration to the disembodied head from this hideous.
This is getting weird fast. We got to get back on track.
Well, here's how I'm going to get us back on track. Why is this album and book called Only the Lover Sings?
Yeah, so I loved this little book that Joseph Pieper wrote called Only the Lover Sings, and then I found out that the title is actually a quote from St. Augustine, and there's a lot in this book about what he calls contemplation, which is I think we might have talked about this a little bit last time.
Probably.
That the word temple is tucked into the word contemplation, contemplation, and this is where you go to gaze upon the deity who inhabits the temple. And but he says, in a Christian context, we've been shown the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. And for the Christian, we're always moving as pilgrims towards the beatific vision, which is the joy set before us, which is the face of Jesus. And he says that if we're, but there are all these things that interrupt that pilgrimage towards the face of Jesus. He's always inviting us and calling us to turn our faces to his face. Mm-hmm. But that's also really scary, because what we've gotten used to thinking are the lies about God, that he doesn't love us, that, it's the original, it's the way back lie, all the way back to, the garden, which is, he doesn't really love you as much as he says he does. In fact, you need to take matters into your own hands and get out of here before it's too late,
Yeah.
And, but here is Jesus saying, turn towards me. I'm trying to make eye contact with you. But it's so scary, and there are all these things that get in our way. But if we finally do repent, which is to turn in the opposite direction and face him, we're going to be surprised. This is the big gospel joke, is that God's got a big grin on his face, actually, and you never would have guessed.
Yeah.
That and I love this the benediction that shows up a lot in the scriptures about make the light of your face to shine upon us.
Yeah.
And a shining face is a smiling face. It's a glad face.
Yeah.
Lord, would you smile on us? We need to see your smile. And so the one who sings is the one who takes that risk in spite of all that resistance, in spite of all that fear and deception, and just turns for a second to see what the face of God might actually look like. And is totally blown away and surprised to find this glad, shining face that calls us beloved. And so this album is built around the woman at the well and that particular instance of this whole idea, where there's this woman who has every reason in the world to assume that there's no way God could ever smile at her.
Yeah.
But by the end of that conversation, she sees something she didn't expect to see, and it changes her whole life. And she goes, and singing is kind of a term that captures any kind of loving response to God's love. So she goes into the town proclaiming, she's singing, she gets a new song about life is better than I thought it could be.
Yeah. This man knew everything that I ever did, which is a strange thing for her to go back and say, great news, everybody. This man knows everything I ever did.
All of my deepest, darkest secrets have been revealed, and it's great. I love it. Yeah, that doesn't make sense to us. We can't, unless what we find out is that the one who sees it all, the context of that seeing is belovedness.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that could make sense of a statement like that.
Yeah. I want to talk for a minute about if I had the insight to like initiate that quote, I would have been tempted to say only the beloved sings instead of only the lover sings.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, why is it? Because it is the one who discovers themselves to be beloved. Maybe he's talking about the that initiative. Like, well, there is also this sense of there's an epistemologist, Esther Lightcap Meek, and she wrote a book called "Loving to Know," as in loving in order to know.
Yeah,
and the idea is that everything God has made is in some sense declaring His glory and His love to us, like Psalm, is it 19 or 119? I always forget. 19. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything is declaring. There is no, no place on earth where their language is not heard. But unless you attend to those things, you will totally miss that declaration.
Yeah.
And so she talks about how you have to actually turn towards something and care about it, wait for it in order for it to have an opportunity to reveal itself. And even Jesus is like that. Jesus is asking for us to show Him hospitality, to show Him care and attention. And the sort of result of that is that we find out the truth about our belovedness. So it is a weird thing. Jesus is loving us first. He's initiated that. But He's also asking and inviting us to love Him in order to find out that how much we are loved. And then that just creates a sort of virtuous cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. The understanding that you're beloved is how you become a lover.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're ready to sing.
Oh, Chesterton said something about Beauty and the Beast. And he said, Beauty and the Beast, do you remember this? It's a fairy tale about how a thing must be loved in order to be lovable.
Yeah. Yeah.
A thing must be loved first in order to be lovable.
Yeah. And he says something similar about Rome. He said, Rome, men didn't love Rome because Rome was great. Rome was great because men loved her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which also sounds like Texas, right?
I just drove through Texas last week.
Well, you go to Texas and you go, wait a minute, this is what's supposed to be so great? But the fact that Texans love it so much is what makes Texas great, because it's not I'm sorry.
We're going to get in trouble.
But if you're not from Texas, you don't get it, right? You're from Tennessee, and you go see Texas, you go, I don't understand what's supposed to be so great about this. I mean, the food, I will hand it to the Texans on the food, but
the barbecue that's the real deal.
Yeah.
And I lived in Memphis for a while, so I might get in trouble for that, but
yeah, right. Okay. This is a project that grew out of suffering, personal suffering on by you.
Mm-hmm.
And in your introduction, you tell a story of that you went through a divorce years ago, and that the suffering of that experience. In some ways, this project is you pick it up. I don't know where to.
Well, going back to the woman at the well
scene
like that. I don't know if you've ever experienced where a certain passage or scene or image just not because you're making any particular effort, but just I feel like because the Lord keeps bringing it up, I felt like that story, I couldn't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
I would go somewhere and listen to a concert, or I'd watch a movie. Like it just popped up everywhere, and and seeing and learning more about that woman's suffering in multiple marriages that had failed, or and then that became very important for me, because this was, I mean, I had suffered, whatever griefs, but this was kind of my first massive explosion, this thing that just everything fell apart. And it was really difficult to understand or make any sense of my own life at that point. It was a really scary season, and just such a disorienting season. And the process of getting to this project was very slow. I mean, it was a 6 or 7 year process of really a very deep grief that I never could have imagined,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You quote one of your friends, and I'm gonna get this wrong. I'm not quoting you, I'm paraphrasing, but one of your friends said, your griefs are the knots in the otherwise smooth rope of your soul that somebody else who's just trying to hang on, those knots give them something to hang on to. Maybe you can help me with that.
Yeah, that's my friend Brian. He's a counselor now, actually, up in Michigan, but that was a really helpful image to me because, and that is actually a part of a song that's on an album called "Come Tell Your Story," which was an album that somewhat came out of that season, I was just trying to keep moving, and so that song is, I forget the name of the song actually, but anyway, that image of, you feel like all knotted up inside. You feel like everything is just chaotic. But he said, actually that's going to wind up in the end being something that can be a blessing, because if there's somebody else drowning and you hand them a slick, smooth rope, it's going to be hard for them to get a grip on it. And actually your sufferings are going to become these opportunities, things that people can grab a hold of, and it'll make it easier for them to hoist them out of their own kind of overwhelm,
Yeah.
And I had another, I think this is a little bit maybe related to the log in the eye in the Sermon on the Mount. I thought for a long time that was a kind of a snarky thing Jesus was saying, like, you got a big log in your eye, jerk, But I think kind of what he's saying is, as if you'll pay attention to the hurt in your own life and really grieve it well and really make real contact with it and not try to avoid it by blaming other people and transferring that to everybody else. If you'll deal with what is right there, you'll get a really close-up look at logs. You will learn a whole lot about logs as you pull that thing out of your eye. And you'll get like this master class in grief and empathy and compassion. And it will actually help you. You really won't be a lot of good to anybody else until you actually face the hurt in your own heart. But then you'll be equipped in a different way.
Yeah.
So I think that's really an encouraging passage, not so much like he's getting on to you,
You say you have decided that it's worth the risk of tossing that knotty rope out. If it helps someone else discover that they're not as alone as they thought.
Yeah.
What's the risk of, I may be stating the obvious. The answer may be obvious, is what the risk of throwing that knotted rope of your own grief out there, but maybe not. But what are the risks? What are the?
Yeah, well, it's just we are built to be loved and enfolded into a family and to be welcomed and cared for and enjoyed. And I think when we really admit the places that we're very broken and the things that make us most afraid, and admit that those things are not out there somewhere abstracted, that they're very real and present within ourselves. Rich Mullins said, these scars move within me, And I think that sort of puts at risk all of those things that we really do legitimately need, that welcome and care and feeling of belonging and loved. And so it feels like if I really look at this log, everything, everything's going to go away. All the things I need are going to be gone. Nobody's going to want to be around me. I don't want to be around me right now. You know?
Right.
And I wouldn't blame other people if they didn't want to be around me. And it feels really scary. But I think what really helped was I realized that some of the people I loved the most and felt the most kinship with were people who had opened up and been really vulnerable, mm-hmm. and who had pioneered that kind of honesty. Mm-hmm. And that gave me some courage to feel like that I should do that too, or I needed to do that.
How has that kind of honesty shaped your creative process, your output? To sort of bring this around to creative work.
Uh-huh.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the really wonderful results of going to those places that are so scary, it's this whole idea of the surprising smile of God, is that when you begin to enter into those places, as miserable as it is, people just come out of the woodwork, mm-hmm. and you find out that you aren't alone. People say like, "Oh, this, I went through this, or I went through this," and people start showing up. Not everybody shows up. You do lose some people, mm-hmm. inevitably. I don't want to be, sugarcoat that. But people do show up in a way that is surprising, and you find out that everybody's carrying weird, hard stuff. And I was actually just having a conversation last night about Jesus on the cross, and Jesus as the pioneer, or the Hebrews says he's the author and perfecter, but sometimes it says he's the pioneer of our faith, and he's the one who he blazes the trail, which means he walks ahead and he nails up little metal discs to the trees so you can know where the path is. But one of the things he does is on the cross, he's saying, I know it is terrifying for you to face this stuff, and so I'm going to do it first. I'm going to do it for you. And so the cross it looks like this big emblem of condemnation on us. And in a sense it is. But in another sense, it's Jesus just saying, look, I'm willing to be with you no matter where you are. In the very worst place, I'm willing to accompany you. And that's what I found, was that when I got to that worst spot, Jesus had beat me there. He was already there. Yeah. And that changed my creative process, in the sense that as I went along, I felt like maybe I don't have to be alone in this, and maybe I could actually involve more people. And maybe that actually is the pattern of reality. Maybe there's something here that I've always thought wasn't possible, and it is.
Maybe this is the pattern of reality, you said. Mm-hmm. Can you tease that out a little bit? The pattern of reality?
Yeah. Well, so Jesus this all sounds like, theological abstracting, but I don't mean it like that. I mean, like, this is real, in that Jesus is the Logos, right? He is the rationale of the universe, of the cosmos that he created. And so if we trace everything back to the original family of the Trinity, Jesus is not doing something on the cross that's in some sense exceptional to his character. Mm-hmm. He's doing exactly what he always does. He's doing the same kind of thing that he's done forever. Mm-hmm. There's a term, the kenosis, the emptying out. And there's this thing, the pattern in the Trinity is that the Father is always emptying out to the Son and the Spirit, and the Son is always emptying himself out, pouring himself out for the Father and the Spirit. So they're always doing this. And so what's happening at the cross is just the pattern of reality. It's just the way God does things. And it's actually natural. Everything we have gotten used to is unnatural. And He just shows us the way things really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that the pouring out in our economies, we come to think of, if I'm pouring out, I won't have anything left.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, if I hold on to things, I'll have more. And you're saying, seems to me, one of the things you're saying is the pattern of reality is no, when you pour out, there's more where that came from.
Superabundance. Jeremy Begbie uses the word superabundance. And he says we live in a mentality of, we mistake the pattern of reality as a pattern of scarcity. Mm-hmm. And that we're hoping we have enough, and I got to get mine and you better get yours. Yeah. And when the pattern of reality is actually superabundance, that there is, it's not, I have a friend, my friend I just visited in Texas, Bubba, and he said, he has 6 children, and he says, I don't love them, my love isn't divided by 6. He said, I love each one of them 100%.
Yeah.
Like it's not a problem of, you got to have just enough pie. Mm-hmm. You might not get any pie. There's actually plenty. There's more than enough. And Stanley Hauerwas wrote this book, Letters to His Godson. The Character of Virtue is the name of the book. And this phrase he repeats throughout the book, he says, in Christ, we worry about running out of time. He said, but in Christ, we have been given all the time in the world. Yeah. We worry about running out of kindness, but he said, in Christ, there is endless kindness. You will never run out of kindness or grace or mercy, all these things.
And it never occurred to me until you said that, but it's really helpful to know the difference between what we can run out of and what we can't run out of. Right? Like willpower, for instance, and strength. I mean, I do run out of strength and willpower.
Yeah.
And we value willpower, and even from a, creative, when we're talking about creative work, there's always this balance between, you actually do have to keep yourself at the desk and keep working. There's something like willpower involved in that, or discipline, which is not the same thing as willpower. I guess maybe discipline is, you put discipline in place, so you don't have to rely on willpower, perhaps.
That's true. Yeah.
So there are things, we're not going to work this out, and we don't have enough time to work this all the way out. It's an idea that's just at this moment occurring to me. Mm-hmm. It's helpful to know what are the things that you can run out of, and don't depend on those things.
Yeah. Well, I've been listening to, I've been driving a lot the last couple of weeks, and I was listening to Kate Bowler. Are you familiar with Kate Bowler?
I know the name.
Yeah.
People talk like she's just amazing.
She is. I haven't listened to a lot, and I haven't read her books, but I've listened to several interviews. But she was talking about limitations, about how we have kind of the American dream of, I can do anything. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I can make any dream a reality. And she said, that's not really true. Like, we have very real limitations. We have only so much energy. We have to sleep. It's built. We have to eat. We have some very basic indicators of our human limitations. We have brokennesses that I drove by some guys on the side of the road yesterday who were begging, and I thought, like, there are a lot of reasons you could end up in that situation. It might be because you drove everybody in your life away,
Yeah.
Or it could be, but I've met people who have ended up in poverty because of really weird circumstances that they didn't have any control over. They got some kind of crazy illness and it just knocked them out, or whatever, or there was injustice. So there are all kind of limitations we have to deal with.
Yeah.
And that was part of the difficulty for me. It was experiencing the divorce was a reality check in that sense. That I could never have imagined how insane life could become, how unfamiliar my own life could become to me.
Yeah.
And once that had happened, it was very difficult for me to know what could possibly be next. Where do I go from here? I don't understand anything anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. You phrased it in your introductory essay. My own story had become unrecognizable to me. And so you've got this book that you were reading, and now suddenly all the pages are blank. All the future pages are blank.
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote about that in a song called "You're Gonna Be Okay," but like feeling like my face was smushed up against a wall of black, and I couldn't imagine or see anything beyond that point.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about that introductory essay to Only the Lover Sings is that what starts out, that the image of the blank pages, which is an image of despair early in the essay, becomes an image of hope at the end.
Yeah.
Right? Because there will be surprises, to quote Drew Miller. Yeah. And that blankness, the fact that we can't read these pages that are ahead of us. Hallelujah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because that predictability of the future is it's one of those, I mean, it's a lie, right? I mean, you've been talking about, who knows why our life is going to be thrown into turmoil.
Yeah, you can't solve. This is something that the next album is about. It's about how after this encounter happens, and it's wonderful and it's great, and things really do change because now you are in Christ, and it doesn't fix everything.
Yeah.
You wonder why. You're like, why? But that was supposed to solve all the problems, right? Now I should be able to get back on track with my original plan of understanding and planning and figuring out my life. It's like, no, actually, what you've done is you've entered into a different region of life where you're called to trust and keep faith. And, but that is actually ultimately a hopeful thing. Back to Kate Bowler, she said, I think hope is God has dropped an anchor in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So we know about the new heavens and new earth, new creation, and that gives us hope. So maybe the last page isn't blank, but there are a lot of pages between here and there that are blank.
Yeah, and you got to hang in there. But I think the experience, too, of very real grief, very real loss, there are a billion species of death that we will experience in this life. And that's part of the training. Part of the training is learning to die well, and which is another way of maybe saying learning to allow God to enter in and inhabit our grief with us, and continue to find out that he's capable, that he's not asleep on the job, that he can do things that we can't do, and that our limitations then become these kind of bright spots, or like those pages become signs of hope in the context of the story that he is telling. They don't have to be as terrifying. They might still be a little terrifying, but they don't have to be ultimately terrifying,
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of the pattern of reality, you talk about the idea that you say the liar can't be touched because what the liar, the self the liar presents is not the true self.
not really them.
Not really them. And so even if that false self got touched, I still didn't get touched.
Exactly. Yeah.
And such an important insight from the story of the woman in the well that you discuss is, and I think this is so relevant to people who do creative work, is the idea that we have to push through the pain of telling the truth about who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And once we do just a little of that, as you said, the face that faces us is a smile and not a frown. And so, we tell a little more truth, and we get to hopefully a place where we stop relying on falsehood to get us through. And then we have something to say as a person who writes or paints or performs music.
Yeah, I was just listening to Mars Hill Audio Journal yesterday, and it was an old interview from 2011, and I cannot remember the guy who was being interviewed, but he was an author. And he said, I write in hopes of feeling connection, in hopes of feeling, I'm looking to be with people in these stories. And I think in order for that to really happen, there has to be truth, because lies aren't real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Lies are not reality. And so if you make your life up out of lies, then you're not really there. And so I want to show up in this sense to my own life, because I don't want to be a non-entity made up out of vapors. I want to be touched, because I want to be touched. I want to embrace and be embraced. I want to be with people. I want to really be here, and I want you to really be here.
Yeah.
And I think you can see in that story of the woman at the well that there's an evasiveness throughout a lot of that encounter, where Jesus is saying, I'm here for you. If you ask me for water, I'm happy to give it to you. I'm right here. She's playing some games, and she's kind of knows how to do that. But yeah. And I think that there was another story, I wrote about this in the book to one of the intros, that in college, a friend of mine, we went up on the top of one of the dorms one night, and we were laying out under the stars, 2 or 3 fellas, and he confessed something really, really hard, really very vulnerable. And I was surprised that the feeling I had towards my friend was not repulsion. It was actually, there's more of him for me to love. Now that I know this, something about him has become more present and available to me. And I'm sure it was scary for him to open up in that way, but it ended up actually bonding us even more.
Yeah.
And we're still friends 20 years later or whatever,
Yeah.
But in the writing process, I think that can be very scary. And there's always the difference between throwing out the rope and then just dropping a big rock in somebody's lap. There's inappropriate sharing, of course, but
yeah. And writing, by the way, really does lend itself to lying if you want to. I can present a self. When I'm actually interacting with people in real life, they get a good idea of who I am. But when I'm writing something,
a lot of editing,
I can present whatever self I want to.
That's very true. Yeah.
And so I have to resist the temptation to lie.
Yeah. It's like being funny. You think of all the funny things to say later. And but in writing, you can take the time to think of them, and then people will think that you're actually funny.
That's right.
But I think you are actually funny, Jonathan, though. So,
hey, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. But you're right. Yeah, you can present and edit and clean all that stuff up. And, craft demands that to some degree.
Sure.
But
Well, you're always going to be a little bit smarter, a little bit better version of yourself in writing, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully you're within the range of what yourself is. You're on the more clever, insightful range of who you actually are.
Right.
And then there's all, George Saunders talks about the idea that you, in writing, somehow tap into a supra-personal wisdom.
Oh, interesting.
Right? That you actually are, like, if you're smarter than your novel or your essay, you might be in the wrong business. That in the process of writing, you are tapping into something that's beyond you.
Yeah.
And so, when we admire Tolstoy for his moral gigantism, what we're really admiring is Tolstoy, something that was a little more moral than Tolstoy. And if you Saunders quotes some of his wife's diaries about what a jerk he was, and you realize, oh yeah, this person we admire so much, or even in Bruce Springsteen's One Man Show, he said people are always like, oh, I sure would like to be Bruce Springsteen. He goes, yeah, so would I, because the Bruce Springsteen that he presents is not Bruce Springsteen. It's the character Bruce Springsteen, and then there's the guy who has to, go home to New Jersey and do whatever he does in New Jersey or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that is a fascinating thing. I've experienced that. Well, going back to the idea of limitations, like we always have a lot of plenty of good reason to what Paul talks about, like rightly estimate yourself. Think, is it Romans 12? I can't remember. He talks about have a right estimation, consider yourself rightly, and so like we always have a lot of reasons to do that. But at the same time, one of the amazing things about being in Christ is that we are inside of something more than us.
Yeah.
And so we're participating in a reality that is beyond our limits, that is much larger. We're embraced by that, which means that if we make stuff and we are honest and we can really show up and tell the truth and be touched and then make things out of that place, then inevitably those things will become more than we could have meant for them to mean. They will become more than we ever could have made them.
Yeah, that is so good.
Because we're plugged into something that is more than us. And then it's okay for us to be limited. We don't have to pretend to be the origin of everything amazing.
Yeah.
And return to our origin and participate in his life. Does that make sense?
That is good, Matthew. I'm glad we didn't end this 5 minutes ago.
That's also part of what collaboration does, because you are participating and you're inviting other people to make real contact with these patterns of reality and to make things together. Then all kinds of things open up and become possible and beautiful in those relationships. And
take 2 minutes to talk about a little of how collaboration made this project, Only the Lover Sings, the book and the record, better.
Oh, it helped. Oh gosh, there's so many ways.
But you've only got 2 minutes, so
I've only got 2 minutes. Let me go. I got kind of tired of just hearing my own voice, and I've the last few years, and this is very influenced by Lancia Smith at Cultivating Project, involving me in that, Diana Glyer in her work. But I really wanted to do this project with somebody. And so I invited a bunch of essayists to not analyze or critique the songs, but to cooperate with the songs, to respond and enter into the story with me and write. I left it pretty open-ended and said, write what you would like to write. And so then I got to find out all these other angles and ways that the story and these songs and other people were experiencing the love of God, the smile of God, that gladdening light, and in ways that I wouldn't have thought of. And then I got to be surprised. And then for the first time in my life, I hired an editor. And even that experience was, Elizabeth Adams edited, and I could feel, in a very real, tangible way, I could feel the writing get better.
Yeah.
As she would say, well, this sentence should be up here and not down there. And these words, you don't need these words. And she was so gentle, and it was just a wonderful experience. I'm like, why? I will never go back.
And even visually, this is so beautiful, the cover and the interior design. Tell me about that. Who?
Yeah, there's a guy that I worked with about 10 years ago. I made an album called Bright Came the Word from His Mouth, which was a sort of translation into song of Sandy Richter's book, Epic of Eden.
Okay.
And I found this guy on Etsy.
Really?
Named Eugene Frost. Yeah, I just scanned Etsy for a couple of days and found this guy's work just jumped out at me. It was so beautiful and wild and imaginative and interesting. And he's a Russian guy.
Really?
He lived in St. Petersburg. He actually recently had to kind of escape. So he's not there now. But yeah, I called him up and I said, hey, would you mind? I would love to work with you again. We kept in touch a little bit over the years. And boy, I love his work.
That is so intense. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
All right. We better wrap this up, Matthew. Okay. Real quick, although I have to give you a minute. I mean, you're so widely read. You so many good things that you pay attention to. So I do have to end with I can't skip the question: who are the writers who make you want to write? Who's really affecting you right now?
Right now, I'm in a little writing group back home. We're called the Draftlings. Double entendre. We often bring beer, but we also just share drafts of things. And that came from the Bandersnatch, Diana Glyer. But we've been meeting for over 2 years now, consistently. And that's honestly, great. Like some of my friends in that group are the people who, my friend Sarah is going back through a third draft of her first novel. You would love it, actually. She's very much a Southern Gothic. She's a Flannery O'Connor fan. A guy named Rex Bradshaw, who wrote one of the essays for this book. He actually wrote the last essay. So a lot of those guys I'm reading their stuff. And then Rex reads everything. And he recommended a book called Between the Embers and the Stars, which is a philosophy book, but it's different. It's beautiful. And I've been reading that.
Who's the author? Do you remember?
It's a Czech name. It's Erazim Kohak. I don't know how to say the name, actually. I haven't heard it pronounced yet. And then Kate Bowler, I've been listening to her. Mm-hmm. So... And Joy Clarkson, actually. I read Joy Clarkson's newest book, Aggressively Happy, is so fun and winsome. I love winsome, I think is the right word. She's kind of like a female Chesterton, I think.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much. Matthew Clark. It's always a pleasure to talk.
So good to be here. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. To check out more of our podcasts, visit rabbitroom.com/podcast. Our work at The Rabbit Room would be impossible without the generous support of our membership. If you'd like to learn more about membership at The Rabbit Room, visit rabbitroom.com/member. And thanks for listening.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.